The planet Nexaria was a land of endless snow and towering mountains. The air was crisp and cold, and the world seemed to hold its breath in the silence. The Eurythians, an advanced alien race, lived in harmony with this frozen world, never seeking contact with other species. Their lives were simple and ordered, governed by traditions that stretched back centuries. They believed in maintaining balance, keeping to themselves, and allowing the universe to continue as it had for millennia. Eric, a young Eurythian warrior, stood at the edge of a cliff, staring out over the icy plains below. His dark eyes scanned the endless horizon, searching for something, anything, to stir his restless mind. He was loyal to his people, to his planet, but lately something had been gnawing at him. The rigid rules, the never-ending traditions, seemed to suffocate him, trapping him in a world that felt too small, too controlled. He often found himself wondering if there was more to the universe than Nexaria and its cold, lonely mountains. That day, as Eric walked through the snowy forest, a sudden rumble shook the ground beneath his feet. His heart raced as a bright light appeared in the sky, streaking across the heavens like a falling star. But this was no ordinary star. It was a ship, a massive metal craft, spiraling out of control as it plummeted toward the surface of the planet. The Eurythians had never seen anything like it. Their people had always kept to themselves, far removed from the rest of the universe. So when the crash came, it was a shock, an event that would change the course of history for both humans and Eurythians. Eric's training kicked in instantly. He sprinted toward the crash site, his heart pounding in his chest. The ship crashed with a deafening roar, sending a wave of snow and debris flying in all directions. He dove to the ground to shield himself from the explosion, his body pressed against the frozen earth. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. When the dust cleared, Eric rose to his feet, his heart still racing. The ship lay in pieces, broken and scattered across the snow-covered landscape. He could see the faint outlines of survivors, struggling to free themselves from the wreckage. But one figure stood out among the rest, a human. A woman dressed in a torn uniform, lying motionless on the ground, blood staining the white snow around her. Without thinking, Eric rushed toward her. His instincts screamed at him to help, but a voice in the back of his mind told him to stay away. The Eurythians had no reason to involve themselves with humans. They were unpredictable, chaotic, and far less advanced than the Eurythians. It was against their way of life to get involved with outsiders. But as Eric knelt beside the woman, he saw the pain etched on her face. She was injured, badly, but there was something else in her eyes, a strength, a resilience that spoke to him. He had never seen anything like it before. She was human, but in that moment, she was just another soul in need of help. Eric hesitated for only a moment before reaching out to her. He gently lifted her into his arms, feeling her cold body against his chest. She was light, fragile, and yet there was an undeniable power in her. He had no idea who she was or where she had come from, but he knew one thing: he could not leave her there to die. He carried her back to the Eurythian camp, where the others would surely see him. The council would not approve of what he was doing, but he didn't care. For the first time in his life, Eric felt as if he was making his own choice, not bound by the rigid traditions of his people. The woman in his arms, though a stranger, felt like something important, something he couldn't turn away from. As he approached the camp, the other Eurythians turned to look at him, their faces filled with confusion and disbelief. Eric could feel their judgment, the weight of their disapproval pressing down on him. He ignored them, his focus solely on the woman in his arms. "Eric, what is this?" one of the elders asked, his voice stern. "This is a human," Eric replied, his voice steady despite the fear swirling inside him. "She needs our help." The elder looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You know the rules. We do not interfere with outsiders." "This is a mistake, Eric. You are jeopardizing everything." But Eric didn't back down. For the first time, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond duty, beyond the rules. He couldn't explain it, but there was something in the woman's eyes, something that called to him. He had to help her, even if it meant breaking the most sacred rule of his people. As the elders argued amongst themselves, Eric carefully laid the woman down on a bed of fur and blankets. He could see that she was still breathing, though weakly. Her wounds were severe, but he knew there were ways to help. The Earthians had advanced medical technology, far beyond anything the humans had, but using it on an outsider was forbidden. For a long moment, Eric just stared at her, his heart heavy with uncertainty. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He couldn't turn back now. He had made his choice. The woman stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she looked around in confusion, and then her gaze met his. There was a flicker of recognition, and then a faint smile. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but to Eric, it felt like the beginning of something significant. And just like that, the course of his life changed forever. The arrival of the unknown had set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of everything Eric had ever known. The future of both humans and Earthians would now be shaped by the choices he made in this moment. The camp was filled with uneasy whispers as Eric carefully laid the injured human woman on a bed of soft fur blankets. Her face, though pale from blood loss and shock, carried an expression of quiet resilience. She had survived the crash, and now she would survive the injury. If only the Earthian healing technology could work. But this was uncharted territory for Eric. The Earthians had never healed a human before. Their methods were designed for their own kind, whose biology was vastly different from humans. Eric stayed close, watching over the woman as she slept. His mind raced. The elders had been angry, furious at his decision to bring the human back to camp. They questioned his judgment, his loyalty to the Earthian way. Eric had always known there were rules that governed every aspect of life on Nexuria, but none of them had ever felt so wrong as they did now. In the face of this woman's suffering, the rules seemed irrelevant, like a relic of the past that no longer served any purpose. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to help her. It wasn't just the raw, unspoken strength he had seen in her eyes, or the way she had held on to life, even as her body betrayed her. There was something more, something deeper. Eric couldn't explain it, but he felt that this human woman had come to Nexuria for a reason, and he was determined to discover what that reason was. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the thick, icy clouds above, Eric found himself standing before the council, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he was about to face the consequences of his actions. The elders sat in a semicircle, their faces impassive and stern as they watched him. At the center, the High Elder, Maris, spoke first, his voice like a cold wind. "Eric," Maris said, his eyes narrowing, "you have broken the most sacred rule of our people. We do not interfere with outsiders. We have lived for centuries in peace, untouched by the chaos of the universe beyond. Why have you risked everything for this human?" Eric swallowed hard, but met the elder's gaze with a resolve he hadn't felt before. "She needed help. I couldn't leave her to die in the snow." There was a long silence. The council exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes flickering with concern and disbelief. Finally, Maris spoke again, his tone low and serious. "You know as well as I that our people do not show mercy to those who break our laws. This human woman could be dangerous. She could be here to bring harm to us, to expose our existence to the outside world. We do not know who she is or where she comes from. She could be part of a greater threat." Eric stood his ground. If she wanted to harm us, she would have done it already. She is hurt. She is not our enemy. The room fell silent again, the weight of Eric's words hanging heavily in the air. He could feel the tension building, but something deep inside him told him that he was right. The woman, Captain Layla Weston, as he had learned from the small piece of identification he had found on her uniform, was not a threat. She was a survivor, just like him. And the universe, in all its vastness, had brought them together for a reason. Meanwhile, in the corner of the camp, Layla slowly regained consciousness. Her head was spinning, and the sharp sting of pain in her side made her wince. She had no idea where she was or what had happened, but she could feel the warmth of a fire nearby and the faint scent of something unfamiliar in the air. Her eyes fluttered open, and she saw Eric sitting at a distance, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Where am I?" Layla whispered, her voice weak. Eric turned, startled at the sound of her voice. He had been lost in thought, consumed by the uncertainty of his actions. But when he saw her looking at him, a wave of relief washed over him. "You're safe," he replied gently, moving closer. "You're on Nexuria, my home." Layla blinked, trying to process the information. Nexuria. That wasn't possible. Nexuria. She repeated, her voice incredulous. "I don't. How did I get here?" "You crashed," Eric said. "I found you, and I brought you back here. You were hurt." Layla's mind raced. She remembered the crash, the terrifying descent through the atmosphere, the deafening noise as the ship had exploded. She had thought they were all going to die. And now, here she was, on a strange planet, far from home. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Eric hesitated before answering. He knew the truth could never be fully understood by her, not yet. "I was nearby when the crash happened. I saw you. You were injured, and I couldn't leave you behind." For a moment, Layla just stared at him, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had never encountered a species like the Erethians before. They had saved her, but why? What did they want in return? The human side of her was cautious, always looking for the catch. But the more she looked into Eric's eyes, the more she saw something different, something that made her believe he wasn't like the other alien species she had encountered. "Thank you," Layla said softly, "for saving my life." Eric nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "It was the only thing I could do." The next few days were filled with tension, not just between Eric and the Council, but within Eric himself. As the time passed, he found himself spending more and more time with Layla. She was recovering quickly, thanks to the Erethian technology, but it was the bond they were forming that fascinated Eric the most. He had never met anyone like her before. She was different from the cold, calculated beings he had grown up with. She was human, flawed, uncertain, but undeniably strong. Despite the growing connection, the fear of discovery loomed over them both. If the Council found out about their bond, the consequences would be severe. Yet, Eric couldn't help but feel that this human, this stranger, had come to Nexuria for a purpose. And as he spent more time with her, he realized that perhaps this was his purpose, too, to help her, to protect her, and, in the end, to change the course of his people's history. But as the days wore on, one question remained in the back of Eric's mind. Could the Erethians ever accept a human among them? And if they couldn't, would Eric be forced to choose between his loyalty to his people and the growing compassion he felt for the human he had saved? The answers were yet to come, but one thing was certain. Everything was about to change. As days passed, the once icy walls surrounding Eric's heart began to melt. The Council had been watching him closely, their eyes ever vigilant. They questioned his every move, monitored his interactions with the human, and reminded him constantly of his duties. But despite their warnings, Eric couldn't bring himself to abandon Layla. The more time he spent with her, the more he began to question everything he had ever known about the Erethians and their rigid code. Layla, for her part, was doing everything she could to recover. The healing technology provided by the Erethians had sped up her physical recovery, but it was clear that her mind was still grappling with the way of the crash. She had lost most of her crew, and the thought of her mission to explore new worlds now seemed like a distant memory. She felt a pang of guilt every time she thought of Earth. Would they ever know what had happened to her? Was anyone even looking for her? But it was Eric who kept her grounded. Every day, he would visit her, bringing her food or simple gifts from the Erethian people. He would sit with her in silence, or they would talk about anything and everything, something that surprised her at first. The Earthians were supposed to be stoic, cold, and emotionless, yet Eric seemed different. He spoke with a depth she hadn't expected. It was as if, for all their advanced technology and knowledge, the Earthians still had a lot to learn about life, about empathy, and about connection. She often found herself wondering how someone so reserved could show such compassion. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, Layla sat beside Eric near the campfire. She had noticed the way his eyes would often wander toward the distant mountains, as though searching for something he could never find. "Why do you look so far away, Eric?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, startled for a moment, as though her voice had broken him from a trance. "I was just thinking," he said slowly. "I've lived my whole life on this planet. I was born here, trained here, and yet I always feel like I am, waiting for something more. I thought I was serving my people by following the rules, by keeping everything in order. But now I wonder if there's something greater than just the traditions and the laws we've always followed." Layla listened intently, intrigued by his vulnerability. She had never heard Eric speak so openly before. Most of the Earthians she had met had been like stone, their faces unreadable and their words guarded. But here, by the firelight, she could see the conflict in his eyes. The quiet warrior who had saved her life was now questioning his own beliefs. "You know," Layla said after a pause, "I think we all feel that way sometimes. I mean, we're all trying to do the right thing, right? But sometimes the right thing doesn't feel right at all. And sometimes it takes meeting someone like you, or seeing something like this, to make us see the world in a different way." Eric looked at her, his gaze softening. "But I don't understand, Layla. You're human. You come from a place I've never known. Your species is chaotic, unpredictable, and yet, when I look at you, I see something that we, the Earthians, have lost. Compassion. A willingness to sacrifice for someone else without expecting anything in return." Layla's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected that kind of insight from Eric, but there was something about his words that resonated deeply within her. Was that it? Was that why she had felt so connected to him, even though they were from different worlds? Because they both shared something that transcended their species, the capacity for compassion. She smiled gently at him, though it was a sad smile. "Maybe that's what I've been missing too. We humans, we often forget to look past our own survival instincts. We get so caught up in what's best for us, what's next, that we forget about the people around us. But meeting you, being here with you, even in this strange place, it's made me realize something. Maybe compassion is the only thing that really makes us human. It's what keeps us grounded, even in the darkest moments." Eric's expression shifted, and for the first time since their meeting, Layla saw a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. It wasn't just compassion, she realized. It was a quiet yearning for change. Eric wasn't just questioning his duty to his people. He was beginning to see a new path, one that involved not just protecting his species, but understanding others too. The following days were filled with quiet revelations. Eric began to see the world around him through new eyes. The Earthians were so focused on their own survival, so convinced of their superiority, that they had never stopped to consider what it would mean to open their hearts to other species. They had isolated themselves, convinced that the universe was a threat to be kept at bay. But as Eric watched Layla, as he listened to her stories about Earth and her people, he began to understand. The universe wasn't just about survival, it was about connection, about empathy, about recognizing that everyone, no matter where they came from, was part of something greater. One evening, as the stars filled the sky, Eric took Layla to the top of a cliff. He had been quiet all day, deep in thought, and Layla could sense that something was weighing on him. They stood together in the silence, the wind howling around them, as Eric spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady but unsure. "I have to do something. I can't just sit here and wait for the council to decide what happens next. You deserve to go home, Layla. But maybe we can change the way things are here. Maybe the Earthians can learn from you, learn from what you've taught me." Layla turned to him, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Eric looked down at her, a fire burning in his eyes. "I mean, I'm going to help you, Layla. I'll do whatever it takes. You've shown me a different way of thinking, and I won't let it go. Together, we can show my people what true compassion looks like." The days that followed felt like an eternity. The air in the camp grew thick with tension, and Eric could feel it weighing heavily on him. It wasn't just the council's increasing scrutiny or the growing whispers among his people. It was the realization that his life, his future, was now intertwined with Layla's. The choice he had made, helping her, defying the sacred laws of his people, was not one he could easily undo. And as the human woman's strength grew day by day, so did the risks Eric faced. There was no turning back now. Layla, too, felt the weight of their growing bond. She was healing, physically, thanks to the advanced Earthian medical technology, but emotionally, the scars were still fresh. She had lost so much: her crew, her mission, her home. And though she had found an unexpected ally in Eric, the fear of never returning to Earth still gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the thought that this might be her final chapter in the cosmos, a lone survivor stranded on a distant world, with no one left to fight for her. And yet, in the quiet moments when she was with Eric, she began to believe that perhaps her journey had a different purpose. Perhaps the universe had brought her here for a reason, to bridge the gap between two species that had never truly understood each other. Eric had already taught her so much about the Earthians, about their stoic nature, their unwavering commitment to tradition, and their isolation from the rest of the universe. She had once seen them as cold, distant creatures, but now she was beginning to see the cracks in their walls, the vulnerability beneath their surface. One evening, after another long day of walking through the snowy terrain and gathering supplies for the camp, Eric and Layla found themselves alone once again. This time, the conversation was different. There was no more hesitation in Eric's voice, no more uncertainty. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant defying everything he had been raised to believe. "Layla," he began, his voice quiet but determined. "The council is getting impatient. They're growing suspicious of what I've been doing. They want to know why I've been helping you, and why I've been ignoring the rules. And soon, they'll come for us." Layla's stomach churned at the mention of the council. She had felt the tension in the air, but hearing Eric confirm her fears only made it feel more real. "What are we going to do, Eric?" she asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. "I'm not going to let you risk everything for me. You've already done more than enough." But Eric shook his head firmly. "No, Layla. This is my choice. I can't sit by and watch my people continue to live in fear of the unknown. I've seen what compassion can do. It can change everything. But the council, they don't see it that way. They see you as a threat, an outsider who doesn't belong. And they'll never understand why I'm helping you, why I'm choosing to fight for you. But I won't back down." Layla stared at him, her heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. She had never expected to find someone like Eric, someone willing to risk everything for a stranger, for something greater than the rules that governed his life. But she couldn't ignore the reality that their actions had consequences. If the council found out what they had been doing, there would be no going back. "You're not alone in this," Layla said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not going to let you carry this burden by yourself. If we're going to change the future of your people, we need to be prepared for what's coming. And we need to take action now." Eric looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of admiration and sadness. He had known, deep down, that Layla wasn't just a passive survivor. She had the heart of a leader, and it was that strength that had drawn him to her in the first place. But now, more than ever, he realized that they were both standing on the edge of something immense, something that could reshape not just their fates, but the future of their species. As the days turned into weeks, Eric and Layla began to devise a plan. It wasn't an easy one. They knew that any attempt to change the council's stance would be met with resistance, violent resistance, most likely. But there was no other choice. They couldn't let the Earthians continue to isolate themselves, to turn their backs on the rest of the universe. The human race was out there, waiting, and if they ever hoped to coexist with the Earthians, they had to start somewhere. Eric spent hours each day sneaking into the council's chambers, listening, watching, learning the intricacies of their politics. He gathered information, piecing together a strategy that he believed could work. But there was always the risk that someone would discover his intentions. Someone might betray him, and if that happened, it would mean not just the end of his dream but the end of everything he had worked for. One evening, as the sun set behind the jagged peaks of Nexaria's mountains, Eric stood before the council once again. This time, however, he was no longer the uncertain young warrior who had once stood in awe of their authority. This time, he was ready. The plan was set, and there was no turning back. "High Elder Maris," Eric began, his voice strong. "I come before you today not as a soldier, but as a witness to something greater. I have seen the power of compassion, of understanding between different worlds, and I believe that the Earthians, our people, have the ability to change, not just our future, but the future of the galaxy itself." The council members exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Eric could feel the weight of their gaze, the judgment in their eyes, but he stood firm. "I have brought a human into our midst, someone who does not belong here. But in her, I have seen the very thing we have forgotten. Empathy, compassion, the willingness to sacrifice for others. If we do not open our hearts to the humans, if we do not extend a hand of friendship, we will remain isolated, alone in the universe, and the future will pass us by." There was a long silence. The council members sat unmoving, their expressions cold, but Eric could sense that something had shifted. Perhaps they were beginning to understand. Perhaps his words, his actions, were enough to make them see the truth. But as the silence stretched on, Eric knew that the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. Whatever decision the council made, he would face it with Layla by his side. They were no longer strangers to each other. They were allies, bound by something far stronger than the rules of their people. They were bound by compassion, and that, he believed, would be their greatest strength.